This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rapin. Joining me this week, two Shinigamis back to Karakura Town after 10 whole years. Nick White.
Okay.
And Danny Martinez.
Bankai.
Thank you. Thank you both for joining me this week. You know, we did that opening just for Danny, who went out and bought a samurai sword this week in celebration of the brand new Bleach movie that just came out. I guess, Danny, before we get into anything, before I ask my legally mandated questions, how are you, like, mentally, physically, spiritually after the release of this Bleach movie?
Mike, it's been a week, and look, I hate starting the show by correcting you on the weekend of your birthday. It's
Oh
a
my
Bleach
God.
He
series.
says he hates it,
But it's before the internet does it, I'll do it for them.
Okay.
It's a Bleach series, so we are adapting the last arc of Bleach finally. So yeah, 1,000-Year Blood War arc. I'm very excited. That's part of it. There's a lot of good anime, not just that, but that's one of my top ones. Also, there was a convention in Dallas. Oh, there is a convention. I'm actually going back after recording. Which is where I got my that's where I got my Sangetsu Bankai, a replica. So it all connects. But
for everyone at home who's maybe not super familiar with the Bleach anime, I mean, could you explain what this means? This Bankai thing that you said, this sword that you purchased. Why is it so important to the show?
If I must address people that don't read Bleach, I guess.
Yes, please.
Sangetsu is. I feel like that's a spoiler too. But it's Ichigo's sword. I bought the main character's sword, replica of it. Yeah. So, go read Bleach. It's great. Go watch the anime, skip the fillers, and then catch up to the new stuff. Yeah,
100% agree with that. For all the good and bad that Bleach is, it's mostly good. I think it's pretty cool. It's probably some of the most beautiful manga art you can buy from like a shonen series, right? That isn't like some prestige Naoki Urasawa series or something like. It's very, very good stuff, like consistently good from beginning to end.
And I love that my TikTok is like all Bleach, all Chainsaw Man. That's it. That's all that's on my TikTok feed right now.
You're living the best life right there, man. That's awesome. Well, let's get into things. I thank you for this little bit of a side, Nick. I appreciate you putting up with us here. Let's get into things. Let's talk about comic books, because this is I Read Comic Books. And in case you didn't know, maybe this is your first episode, 346 episodes in, you tried today's episode. We like to talk about comic books. Today we're going to be talking about 3 number 1 comics. But before we get into any of that, I have 2 legally mandated questions that I have to ask, and that is, how have you been? How have comic books been? I guess we're kicking it right back to you, Danny. Sorry, Nick, you just don't get to say anything today.
Speak for yourself. I knew everything he was talking about. Makes perfect sense to me. I mean, Bleach in all forms is just solid. Watch Bleach, read Bleach, drink Bleach.
Inject Bleach into your veins.
Yes. As our previous president suggested.
Right. Danny,
it's a slippery slope that I'm just gonna get out of.
Just
talking
get us
about
out
comics.
of here.
Yeah, so I kind of told you guys how I'm doing. So I'm gonna tell you what I've been reading, and I'm gonna start with something I had been waiting for a little bit. And overall, I really enjoyed it. I have one gripe with it, and you'll hear what it is. I read Orphan and the Five Beasts from Dark Horse by James Stocco, who is the writer, artist, colors, letters. Everything about this book, James Stocco did it. I don't know if he glued it together before sending it out, but I wouldn't be surprised. If you don't know James Stocco, if you're not familiar with his work, he did Alien, Dead Orbit, Godzilla Half Century War. He's done a lot of stuff, and he's a fantastic artist, fantastic storyteller. So in this book, it's a brand new kung fu epic that follows, spurred on by her master's dying words, the adopted warrior Orphan Mo seeks to find and kill 5 former disciples who now threaten the land with corruption from their demonic powers. Part 5 deadly venoms are part surreal grindhouse. James Stocco brings his knack for ultra-detailed fantasy imagery and over-the-top violence to this classic tale of revenge. And if you're not sold by that,
I'm sold.
Okay,
no, you don't. You said James Stocco. I don't know how I missed this book. I'm in.
I don't know how I missed it either. I was looking through my Hoopla because I hate not borrowing stuff on time, and I was like, oh, this is here. I know I want to read this. I know we talked about it at some point in the past, but yeah, I'm very excited. James Stocco, just his vivid imagery just puts the book over the top. It's funny in some parts, and then you get like Quentin Tarantino blood splatters all over the place. And I wish I could show. I'm gonna probably tweet it out when we put this out, but there's a panel with like 1 million trees drawn. I'm talking like just all the trees you could imagine.
Mm-hmm.
So James Stoke was not holding anything back. He's got a character named Thunder Ties, which I was like, what is happening? So my only gripe is that it's not one and done. I thought it was like a whole thing that, I was going to get to finish, but it's not. And there's no more out right now. So I can't continue the story. That's my main gripe, that I can't keep getting more of it.
And unfortunately, with James Stokoe, it's like you might not get another issue for like a year.
Trees take time, I guess. He probably grows the trees, makes the paper, and then draws more trees.
Right.
So, but yeah, that's my first book. Let's kick it off to Nick.
Yeah. So for me, things have been interesting in West Michigan as it now hits fall. Last week there was a day where it was sunny in the morning and then it rained for most of the day, and then in the late morning there was a sheer downpour of hail, like small marble-sized hail, for about 5 minutes, and it honestly coated everything and it looked like snow for about 15 minutes before it disappeared, and then the rest of the day was bright and sunny. So it's been very bizarre. To top that week off, I also got to make a fun return visit to the dentist, which is always good. Which is great because my dentist has the TVs that are on the ceiling, and they're always so proud of these things, and like that's their small flex, right? And they're like, sure. Oh, do you want what do you want us to put on for you while you're there? And I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, who comes in is like, you know what? I'm on episode 7 of House of Dragons, so let me just log into my HBO Max here, and we can all watch it together. Like, who does that? Like, first off, if you do, respect, but what a weird thing. Like, and I'm always so timid, and I'm like, just put on the aquarium thing with the elevator music. Just do the fish. Just give me the fish with the elevator music. And I'm never like bold enough to be like, I'm on season 6, episode 8 of King of the Hill. So please just drop me in.
See, I would, if I had to go to the dentist so often that they were like regularly asking me what to put on the TV, I think I would just start to watch all of the MCU movies like in chronological order. Start with Iron Man and just be like, you guys have a Disney Plus login? Because I'll just watch everything up through Endgame. We'll call it good. Like, hopefully we can get all of these teeth capped and these molars replaced by the end of all of the MCU movies. And if you haven't, then you'll speak to my lawyer,
Yeah, no, they're always like, yeah, whatever you want. We have all of the subscription services. I'm like, this is so weird. I'm here for 12 minutes. Just give me the fish, okay?
Right. You're like, let me watch an episode of Aqua Teen Hunger Force, and then you can really prove that you shouldn't have done this in the first place.
Yeah. You will learn the error of your way.
Here's why the dentist has that, Nick. Let me tell you my conspiracy theory. The dentist wants to have all those subscription services at home, but he doesn't want to pay for them without a tax write-off. So he puts them through the business. Smart. Great dentist.
I'm just terrified to have a gigantic TV resting over my head the whole time. That's just unnerving to me. But yeah, in terms of what I've been reading, in celebration of Native National Indigenous Peoples Day, as it's known in Canada, or Native American Day, or National Indigenous Peoples Day, or the other name in America, which we will not refer to because we're not going to talk about that.
Sure. We talked about killing Christopher Columbus literally 2 weeks ago on the show.
Yeah.
Or was it last week? I can't even remember.
I think it was 2 weeks ago.
It's fine. It's fine.
So anyway, that was on October 11th, and I figured in celebration of that, I read Two Moons, 1 through 5. This is from Image Comics. It's written by John Arcudi, who some might know as sort of a mainstay for Dark Horse. He's done a ton of BPRD stuff for them and alien stuff, and this narrative follows a young Pawnee man named Virgil Morris, who's fighting for the Union during the Civil War. During this time, he begins to see like some really scary, otherworldly, like just terrifying shit, and he's not sure if it's visions, he's not sure if it's like the stress of war, if he's just been out there for too long now and it's just taking a toll on him. And he starts to see these things, these weird beings that have this vested interest in just the perpetuation of war. It doesn't really matter if it's the Confederates. It doesn't really matter if it's the Union. Like, there are these beings that feed on anger and hate and all of these emotions. And so they just want to stoke the flames. And he's sort of dragged into this battle between these sort of crazy otherworldly beings, and it's just a book that shouldn't work in some ways, because it's like it's a historical narrative, it's a war story, there are body horror elements, there's eldritch terror elements, there's just a lot going on, and yet it all works. And personally, if I was a writer and like suddenly I'm like, all right, so you got to do your research on like Lovecraftian stuff, and you got to learn about the Civil War, and you have to learn about the history of these, Native American tribes and their history and all of this. It just seems super ambitious. There's a really great letter at the back. I know everyone on this show is a huge fan of prose and comics, but Arcudi has a really great piece about how he developed this property and how he's been working on it for so long and all of the research. And beyond that, the artist, whose name I have been dreading, but I think I'm going to nail this, Valerio Giordano, just absolutely nails it. I've never encountered their art before, but it's really solid. Normally, I'm not a huge fan of art that starts to shift towards realism, but I think this hits a sweet spot, and their ability to really just draw, like, Arcudi just throws the kitchen sink from like eldritch beings to period piece historical war drama. It's just really impressive. And I immediately finish issue 1 and I'm on to the next. It's so well paced. It's a fast read, super taut sort of thriller. I think there's something in this book for everyone. And if you're someone who was looking at some of the promotional materials and some of the covers and you're like, oh God, this like seems like super gory body horror, like don't be turned off by that, because it's honestly not, it's not the massive part of the book that the covers and the promotional material would make you think it is.
Interesting.
So if you're worried about that shit, and for me, sometimes I'm like, oh God, are they going to get, overboard with just jugulars being torn out left and right? It's not.
Okay.
There's still some of it, but it's not.
Gotcha. Well, this sounds fun. Does it? Is that the word?
Just a little bit of body horror. Like I don't know if I'm sold still, but I might check it out.
Sure.
Obviously, there's the people out there who are like, I just want 100% body horror, and to which I say Avatar Press exists, and you're fine.
Right. You can read a lot of Vault comics. It's fine. Well, let me jump into one of the books that I read. So it was just recently my birthday. I am now 34 years fun. And I've been sitting on that all day waiting to say it. Sorry. And so I didn't read a lot of comics because instead I went and saw the worst movie out in theaters right now, which is Amsterdam. Kelly, my lovely wife, took me to a movie that by all things on paper should have been a banger, right? We've got an all-star cast from Christian Bale, Margot Robbie, Robert De Niro, Rami Malek, that woman who was in the movie Emma and the Queen's Gambit. Like it's an all-star cast, and that's only like a third of the cast. It's a great cast. It's directed and written by the guy who did like Joy in Silver Linings Playbook. And somehow this is the worst movie I've ever seen, I think, ever, from like a AAA studio. 20th Century Fox and Regency should just be disappointed in the fact that they put money behind this, because the movie on the whole looks great. The costuming, the makeup's fantastic. I think the core of the story about a doctor who wants to help World War I vets is a great idea, but the story has no heart, no plot, no anything. Like it feels like it has all of the tropes of a movie that should work really well, and yet the lines are written so poorly. Everything is bad. The editing is awful. Nothing actually coherently makes sense. And somehow it's at the end about Nazis. It's not about helping vets. It's about Nazis. And I don't understand how we got to that point, because the movie makes jumps and leaps. And the only way that it makes itself make sense is because it keeps constantly self-referencing things that happened 15 minutes ago, as if we haven't been sitting in the theater or watching the same movie. Don't go see this. I swear, if you spend money on this, you're banned from the podcast. And I'm saying that to everyone who's on this show. Danny, who threatened to go see this to me before we started recording. So I'm just saying, don't go see that movie. I love my wife and I don't blame her for this, but my God, it was the longest 2 hours and 15 minutes of my life.
I'll just watch it on TikTok when somebody breaks it up into like 50 pieces.
That is probably the best way to consume it, because at least you won't even have to do a rehash. Like, someone won't have to sum it up for you, because the movie itself rehashes all of the plot points for you so often that you don't. Anyways, perfect. I don't want to complain about that. I want to talk about comics that I read, which wasn't a lot, but I did read some banger comics. Fortunately, a lot of mediocre ones, but there were two that stood out. I want to talk about X-Men number 15. This is by Jerry Dugan, with art by Joshua Cassara, colors by Guru EFX, and letters by Clayton Coles. This Jerry Dugan fella has been doing some incredible work on X-Men. I don't know if anybody out there is actually digging the X-Men book, because I feel like no one is talking about it, but by far, compared to all the other Hoxpox stuff that's going on, I feel like Jerry Dugan is actually doing a creative, interesting story that doesn't feel mediocre, doesn't feel ham-fisted. It's like super well paced. I think by the end of his whole run on X-Men, we're going to be like, holy shit, what an actual like humongous storyline he was telling that was amazing. I feel like there's a lot of weaving. There's a lot of references back to things that happen with these children of, what are they called? Children of the Vault, about like humans being evolved 1,000,000+ years. It kind of takes that idea from the Ultimate Reed Richards storyline, where he created this little place where like people, like the world could evolve inside this bubble so that he could create like the perfect society. But instead kind of flips it and makes it mutant centric around like what happens to humans if they're left in isolation for millions of years. Do they naturally evolve the X gene, or does something else happen? And we've seen a little bit of this before. X-23, aka Wolverine, and Synch went into this vault for a really long time, and they've come out of that super scarred. Or I should say Synch came out of it super scarred because X-23's body was left there. Spoilers for a couple-year-old comic. And I think Dugan coming back to this and finally starting a story arc where we're getting more information about what's happening in the vault is really, really interesting. This issue read perfectly. I think the previous issue read perfectly. And so I'm super hyped for issue 16, which comes out this week.
Sorry, is this the issue that begins with Forge?
Yeah. This is the issue that begins with Forge.
Dude, I agree. I agree with everything you just said. Like when I read Hickman's X-Men, I was like, good luck to the next guy. And then Gary Duggan just comes in like, I got this, hold my beer, and like just took it over. And like it made it like, yeah, we can still touch on Krakoa, but let me make it feel like X-Men, like just like an X-Men centric book.
Yeah, it truly feels like an X-Men only book. It's not trying to tie into like the bigger narrative, and I do appreciate those stories that do, but I love the isolated like look that this book had. And I also felt the same way about X-Force, or I still feel the same way about X-Force, but that's like a different conversation. I know that's not everyone's cup of tea, but the last thing I'll say about this book before I pass things back to Danny is Cassara and Guru EFX are doing tremendous work in this issue. I think there isn't an X-Men book that looks better, in my opinion. I don't think there's a Marvel book that looks better than this book does. I really, really love the extremely high detailed but super muted definition of all the characters, the character designs, the like devastatingly powerful action. I mean, there's some panels in this specific issue that are brutal in terms of just the shit that they're trying to portray to let you understand what quote unquote could happen. It's really, really like amazing stuff. Super impressive to see it on a monthly book. It's kind of one of those things that I think we talk about when it comes to things like 2000 AD, where we're so impressed by how much can be done in just a handful of pages, and obviously these creators have like a month to work on these books, or, four-ish weeks. In 2000 AD, it's like a week, but like, it's still really impressive given how much work we know goes into creating a single issue of a comic book. This is one of the more beautiful books that's out on the shelves, and I really am impressed with it month to month, and I'm really excited to see where the rest of the series goes with this creative team on board. So yeah, who would have thought that an actual core X-Men book could be so good? That's the thing I always wonder. But anyways, Danny, I'm going to pass things back to you. What else have you been reading?
Before I tell you about that book, I just want to say that I love how important and how like what they've done with the character of Forge in the last few years. Like he's been through some shit, so like the way that he like how important he feels now to the world of the X-Men, really cool stuff. So also staying on brand like Mike, I read Batman Incorporated #1, which was my top of the pile last week when I was on Discord. This is a book from DC Comics by Ed Brisson with art by John Timms, colors by Rex Locus, and letters by Glenn Cowell. So this book spun out of there was a Batman annual a few months ago, maybe like a month ago, that spun out of this because Bruce Wayne has no money, but Ghostmaker, who is pretty much like Batman, but just like he's not from Gotham and he'll kill, but Bruce is like they grew up together. It's a big backstory, which
Uh-huh.
I think I talked a little bit about when we talk about Joker War. But nonetheless, go listen to that, and then you'll learn a little bit about Ghostmaker.
Sure.
So he takes over the team because he has money. He's also rich. Well, he is rich now that Bruce doesn't have any money.
Mm-hmm.
So he picks up the team, and let me give you a quick breakdown of the team. And if you want to know more about Batman Inc., please go listen to Paul's series on the Patreon, Better Batmobile, because that was one of the reasons I was very excited for this, because I had just heard and reread all those issues.
Yeah.
So we have Ghostmaker. We also have from the Legacy of Batman Inc., Chief, Man-O-Bats, Raven Red, Batman of Japan, Batman of China, Knight, Dark Ranger, El Gaucho, one of my favorites, Night Runner, Wingman, and of course, the newly minted character by James Tynion, Clown Hunter.
So stupid.
And they've also added Grey Wolf, who is also a new character that you meet in that Batman annual.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I love about this book is that John Tim's art, like, it's very stylized, so it may not be for everyone, but it's like exactly what I'm looking for in a team of like just a bunch of cool looking people like that are bat related. So I want them to look like super cool, big, bright, dynamic movements in their fights, really cool character designs. I love the book. The book is kind of like a mystery that's not really a mystery. Somebody's killing Batman and Ghostmaker's past teachers that, you know, are the people that taught him how to drive, how to steal, how to like do all the cool things that they do. And now Batman Inc. has to figure that out while they're also trying to figure out the mystery of like everything that Lex Luthor's been doing, because Lex tried to acquire Batman Inc. That's a whole other story. Go read Joshua Williamson's Batman for that.
Sure.
So yeah, it's really fun, but I like that it's not really, we pretty much get a reveal at the end of the first issue. So it's not really about the mystery. It's really about how can this team even deal with something like that, because there's infighting between the team. El Gaucho feels like he should be the one leading the team because he's been around almost the longest.
Right.
But all the other Batmen are like, you know, give this dude a chance. So it's really interesting stuff. And it's just like the comic book nonsense that I love. I can't wait to hear what Paul thinks about this issue, because I know he's a big, Batman Inc. Like it's up his alley. But I highly recommend it for anyone that enjoyed Better Batmobile. Go check this out, because although it doesn't have the same themes that ran throughout the Morrison's run, it continues with some of those characters, so you can at least see him on the page again, which is always really nice to revisit.
Yeah.
And before I pass it on to Nick, I read a chapter of a manga this morning.
Okay.
That I picked up at the convention because it had the wildest title. It's called Rooster Fighter by Shu Sakuratani. And all I can tell you is that it's about a rooster, like a normal rooster, that fights demons. These are like giant-sized demons. So I've only read one chapter, and it was insane. So I'm gonna finish through the volume. I still don't know how I feel about it, but I think the plot is insane enough that I wanted to at least bring it up as a manga. That there's a lot of manga readers that listen to this, and even just within us. So I wanted to bring it up as an option. So you guys let me know. So Nick,
listen, before we even go to that, I already read this comic, and it's called Chew, and it was the chicken's name was Poyo. So all I'm saying is like, Shu Sakuratani, what are you doing? No, this sounds really fun. I've seen this ad or advertised to me in some way, shape, or form, and I kind of wanted to check it out. So I'm looking forward to the rest of your review, Danny, because yeah, it looks fun and wild.
Yeah. So hopefully Nick did now. Now, Nick, what do you think of this now that you're a manga reader as well?
I mean, I'll probably have to pick that up, even if Mike is right that it does sound an awful lot like Chew. I'm just relieved to see that Mike looks okay. When Danny started listing off all of those various members of the family that are in this book of his, I figured Mike was getting like flashbacks to Amsterdam again, where they're just like listing everybody off. And it's like a war flashback. Mike's like, it can't be good.
It can't be good. There's too many good characters.
Too many. He's hit the 17-person threshold at this point. Yeah.
20th century Batman Inc. is how you do a story with that cast. All right.
But I'm glad you brought up manga. That's a nice segue, because I want to discuss a manga book that I read called Lost Lad London. And I read the first volume of this, drawn and written by Shinya Shima. Shima doesn't have a lot of credits to their name, but Shima did did co-author the first 2 volumes of Star Wars, The High Republic, The Edge of Balance, which is the manga series that serves as a tie-in to the aforementioned High Republic event. And as Danny pointed out, I am still, relatively speaking, a new-ish manga reader. I think I've been reading manga for maybe about 2 years at this point. I'm always on the lookout for manga that sort of have, a diversity in their representation of protagonists and things like that, because with at least a lot of the manga that I've seen or heard about, it seems like a lot of the manga tends to take place largely in either the United States or Japan, and that a lot of the protagonists tend to be either Japanese or Caucasian and or American. And so to have a book where it takes place in London, and then have your 2 protagonists be a South Asian college student. We don't know from what country yet. We just know that this student named Al is from Southern Asia. And the other protagonist is a Black detective with the Metropolitan Police. I think that's really important. Mm-hmm. I think it's good to see representation like that. Because again, maybe it's just the manga I've seen or heard about. It feels like this diversity of representation isn't always that present, I guess. So feel free to disagree if that's incorrect and it's what I've seen, but
I think it's definitely, I mean, it's an issue, right? Because it feels like all of the characters are typically drawn with a single skin tone. I feel like that has been slowly changing over time. You see a lot of different other books start to incorporate people with particularly darker skin tones, or they're drawn with like more European like features on their faces and stuff. But yeah, I think that there is a diversity issue in manga. I think we are not necessarily the people to talk about it because we're not necessarily experts, but I do agree that if I look at all the books that I have on my shelves, like how many of them feature just Japanese characters, how many feature just like white like type characters. I mean, it's tough to say. But I think like things like, Delicious in Dungeon or Witch Atelier, the first 2 that come to mind, where they do feature characters that have different shades of skin tone. I mean, at least showing that there is some diversity in the worlds that they're trying to create. So it's definitely a thing. And I'm glad that you pointed that out for this, because it's interesting to see a book like that feature folks that aren't just like necessarily from Japan,
Yeah. So the book follows this college student I mentioned named Al Adley. And he's sort of this very self-reliant student. You find out that he was adopted. And so I think that part of that has something to do with this sort of self-reliance, and he's got to make it on his own. And he's very comfortable with just being quite solitary. And he's getting ready to go into postgraduate schooling, and he does this by by writing his roommate's term papers, which is is a thing.
Nice.
And one day he's riding, whatever you want to call it, the tube, the subway, whatever.
The tube. It's with a hard CH.
Yeah.
The tube.
He thinks nothing of it, and then he finds out later on the news that the mayor of London was actually murdered on the tube. He finds out that he was actually in the same, well, we would say train car in America. They would say carriage, I believe, in the UK. And lo and behold, this Inspector Ellis comes investigating and wants to interview him and talk about it. And Al's discovered that someone planted the murder weapon in his jacket pocket while he was on the train. And so he's like, oh gosh, what do I do? And he shows the knife to the inspector. And the inspector is like, if we go to the cops right now with this, like, this is going to look so bad. And they're going to immediately look at you and say, you definitely killed this guy. Mm-hmm. So we're just going to have to solve this mystery ourselves.
Hell yes.
So you have this secret team up, and both of them are like, don't really trust people anymore, and they're like capable. They're all like, I want to do things by myself. And so you have these two begrudging individuals creating this sort of bromance and learning to sort of get along with each other and also solve this bigger mystery. And it's a lot of fun. It feels different than a lot of the manga that at least I've read, with this detective mystery thing. And the art is just really different. It's really, really different. And it's difficult for me to enunciate. But I would encourage people to look up Lost Lad London, because it really does aesthetically, like, the line work feels really loose. and there's less of an emphasis on pencils or tight pencils than what I've seen with a lot of other, like the precision line work that I see in a lot of manga. It uses these sort of grayscale outline tones for the backgrounds and then uses a much heavier ink to pull things into the foreground like characters. It really doesn't look like anything else I've seen. And for those people out there looking to try something different, especially in terms of manga experiences, I can't recommend this book enough. I finished the first volume, the second volume's out, third volume's on the way. I'll be starting volume 2 real soon. Can't recommend enough.
Sick. Yeah, I'm just looking at this right now. Just some of the preview art that's on the Google image search.
Yeah,
looks kind of cool. I really do feel what you're saying. The art style almost looks like, I hate to say it
almost
this way,
feels
but
like
almost
brush strokes to me in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's very loose, like ink work, but also the style feels almost like Pixar-esque. And I know that that's not a great description, but like bigger eyes, like in a way that doesn't feel like traditional anime eyes, right? Like the forms and characters feel very lanky, the way that I think a lot of like Pixar characters can look. So that's really cool. Maybe I'll give this a try, Nick. I hate taking recommendations from you, but
me too.
Well, I'm also gonna talk about a manga because I guess that's what this show is
manga
now.
Crew.
Today, I just really want to briefly touch on the last thing that I read today, earlier before the show, Akira Volume 3. I'm continuing down this Akira journey, reading Katsuhiro Otomo's Akira, for folks out there who haven't heard of this. This is where, in my opinion, I think this comic gets a bit away from the movie, and I really, really, really like it. So if you've seen the Akira movie, you've seen a great film. You have not seen the complete Akira story. And I really like the direction that this story takes. There's a lot more action in this volume. There's a lot more unfolding of the actual plot between what's happening with the army, what's happening with these weird children that have these telepathic powers, what's happening with Kay and Canada. What are they doing other than just running around, right? They actually get some things that they're trying to do. But the thing that I really enjoyed about this volume is how much action there was, but not for the sake of action, but as proof that war only hurts the people in the country in which the war happens, right? So this volume focuses around, I think, a small thing that's touched on in the movie, which is the military is trying to basically take over this country via a coup, and that becomes a central part of the storyline. And in order to do that, what does the military have to do? They have to press the proletariat, right? They have to push down on the people of the country, and so Key and Canada, as they're kind of gallivanting, trying to escape from the military who's out to hunt them, because spoilers, I'm just going to spoil a little bit of this, I'm sorry, but like Akira wakes up, and that happens in the movie, so not a huge spoiler, but instead of becoming this spirit entity at the end of the movie, Akira is actually a kid. And there's this question of what's going to happen when Akira, quote unquote, finally wakes up. That's the thing that they've been hinting at since the beginning of volume 1, and we actually get to see what happens in this volume. But as Canada and Kay are trying to escape with their new friend, Chiyoko, who is part of this rebellious organization. There are other people who are trying to rebel against the martial law that's been placed on the city. And there's just tons and tons and tons and tons of city destruction, not by like any kind of supernatural means, just by the military being present, trying to stop people, shooting guns, shooting tanks off in the city, using missiles, using machine guns. Just, you see, there's so many scenes of people trying to run away from various folks that are trying to kill them, and they're running into just everyday average people, but blasting through their homes with tanks, guns fire, shooting through windows, and people waking up saying, what's going on? What's happening? Whether it's parents or it's children or it's just like elderly people. I really think that there's this super blunt notion that is in the middle of this comic that war devastates the people of the land. It does not have any effect on the actual players involved. It's such an interesting book. I really, really love where this story is going. I can't wait to read the next 4 or 3 volumes. They're super beefy. Like this one was 286 pages, I think, and I think 4, 5, and 6 are easily 350 pages plus. So Akira rules. If you didn't know that, go read this, borrow it from your library, buy it online. It's worth every single penny. You're not going to be mad about this. It's such an entertaining manga, and totally love this. I'm so hyped for the next 3 volumes. It's going to be amazing.
On the upside of Akira never being digital, like they have some of the coolest collections. Like if you buy the whole set, like it just looks so cool. Like this is something you want to put on your bookshelves.
Yeah, I think when I talked about volume 2, I said pretty much the same thing. Like I have the big 6 volumes that you see at your comic shop and stuff. There's also like a 35th anniversary like edition where instead of the comic being left to right, which is what the big volumes are, they're right to left in the original manga format, which is nice. And they're huge, beautiful black like leather bound books. It looks really, really cool. But yeah, Akira's killer, guys. Everyone should read this book. It like is a defining manga. It's a wonderful, like interesting story that defined like a cyberpunk / sci-fi genre that I don't think existed when this book actually came out. I mean, it came out in 91, right around the time Snow Crash was a thing. You know, we're coming out of the 80s where cyberpunk was kind of growing. And I think this manga this manga series like sits right in the perfect middle of that time where we were establishing what like dystopian-ish hyper-capitalistic society looks like. And Akira totally nails that.
And Mike knows that it totally nails that because we're now living it. So, of course, we're able to make that
I open up my comic book and then I look outside and I go, wow, 1-to-1, you know? Anyways,
wow, where's my bike?
We really are living in the future.
Anyways, let's talk about comics that are on the top of our pile. Every week on I Read Comic Books. Again, if this is your first episode, we grab something that's new or old or something we're just excited to read out of our backlog, and we're putting it on the top of our pile to read next. So let's jump right into things. I mean, Nick, let's start with you, actually. You've got a whole list, and I'm going to break your legs if you go through all of them.
Yeah.
What's your one top of your pile pick?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in Mike's 9th circle of hell at this point because I made a long list, but there are a few things that I just want to briefly point out. There's a lot of amazing stuff coming out this week. It's going to be the last issue of Deadly Class, the book that started in 2014. I read some of it. It held Wes Craig hostage, which is a nice segue because we will be talking about Wes Craig's new venture later. The second issue of Bone Orchard is coming out, but the book I want to talk about is Predator #3. Yes, Alien 2 did come out, will be coming out this week. This is not a drill. The pick is Predator 3.
Okay.
Philip Kennedy Johnson, I'm sorry, I've failed you. Look, as much as maybe I've just been spoiled by the fact that Alien has been so consistently good, Predator has just been such a pleasant surprise. This is written by Ed Brisson, drawn by Kev Walker, and I don't really know what's going to happen with this book in the future. Honestly, will the second arc even happen after the 6-issue miniseries? I don't know. Is it going to go the route of the anthology like Alien? Are we going to get this story continuing? Beats me, but Disney, which means if they believe there's another dollar to be wrung from its corpse, they will find a way. And I mean that in both the best and worst way possible. But look, if you're looking for an energetic, galaxy-hopping revenge narrative, this is it. I've had so much fun with this book. I think Predator benefits in the same way nearly as Alien, where it's like, as long as the Predator shows up, it's a Predator story. You've checked the one box. You've achieved the one goal. You're there. But for those who forgot me mentioning this or didn't hear me mention this in the past, basically you have this woman who, when she was a child, Predator killed her parents, and now she's just on a revenge narrative. It's pretty high concept, but I've had a lot of fun. And tale as old as time, right? And there's something about Kev Walker's way that he draws these sci-fi, like Arctic outposts and these crazy spaceships that almost feels like the sort of shit you would see like in a 2000 AD weekly strip where like someone's drawing this like old fangled spaceship and you're like, where did they even come up with this? And it just has that vibe. So I'm just having a lot of fun with this. We'll see where this goes at the end of the miniseries, but that's my pick.
Sick. This book looks so cool. Kev Walker's art is incredible. I think I really want to read it, but I'm probably going to just wait for like a collected edition or something like that just because. But I'm glad that you're enjoying it, Nick. I think of all the people that I genuinely would want to know the opinion of about this book, you are the number one pick because I know how much expectation you have for Predator and Alien and all that stuff. So I'm glad you're enjoying it.
I thought you were going to say the last person because it's going to be so steeped with bias and nostalgia.
No, but that's all the more reason, right? That's all the more reason. Like you are that core fan that I think hopefully they're trying to impress, and sounds like they're doing their job. So that's great to hear. Danny, what about you? What are you excited for? What are you reading next?
Well, Mike, unlike Nick, I only picked one book. Although I could have picked more. because there is a Batman book this week, but that's not what I picked. My pick for this week is Justice League Incarnate. The hardcover's coming out on the 25th. Big shout out to Gad at my comic shop, because he told me, like, you need to read this book because they tell you what the Dark Crisis thing is that they're fighting in Dark Crisis. So obviously, this is not a recommendation for anyone that is new to comics. This is a recommendation for someone that's been reading comics for a long, long time. And the cool thing is, because I have DC Universe Infinite Ultra, or whatever the new thing is called, I don't have to wait. I don't have to wait. Right. I can read it all right now. But
nice.
But yeah, I'm definitely gonna pick up that hardcover because DC's been doing some really cool stuff. So this follows after the team suffers a devastating defeat at the hands of Darkseid. And here comes a list of superheroes, because one of the reasons I love this book is the big cast.
I'm already saying I can't read
Justice League Incarnate by David O. Russell. Yes, go on.
David O. Russell's.
We have Superman of Earth 23, who's President Superman. We have Flashpoint Batman, China's Flash from Earth Zero, Captain Carrot, who I love. Go listen to our episode on
Chris Rock,
anthropomorphic
Christian Bale, Anna Taylor-Joy.
I wish Anna Taylor-Joy was in this book. But yeah, they need to help find a new superhero called Dr. Multiverse, who will help them maybe fix the universe. Who knows? Cool. Because the Dark Crisis seems to have still happened. So I don't know. So even though I already kind of know what happened afterwards, I want to go back and read this because Joshua Williamson and Daniel Colbert, who are writing this, they're very steeped in the lore. Like, Williamson feels like he just loves comic books too.
Yeah.
And they have a rotating cast of artists because every time they go to a different universe, the art changes. Which is the way this is the way you use multiple artists in the book, not because you have deadlines to meet. Shots fired. I'm very excited for this.
That's cool.
But
dude, that sounds super sick, man. I love that idea of using different artists for different universes
for a purpose. Whatever the purpose is, just make sure it's a purpose.
I didn't know that the big two could do something like that.
They try. They've been plotting this one for a while, it feels like. So I have had no complaints about fill-in artists on this whole Dark Crisis Joshua Williamson thing. But Mike, what about you? What's on your top of the pile?
Well, I'm glad that you asked, Danny, but before I get into it, we have some folks hanging out with us on Discord. As always, we record our shows on Sundays sometime between 1 and 3 p.m. Eastern. So if you want to show up and hang out, you too can get a shout out on our show. This week, Kate is reading I Got Fired as a Court Wizard, so now I'm moving to the country to become a magic teacher, a manga volume. Love those light novels that become manga volumes because I don't even need to read the description. I already know what the book is.
Sometimes you don't even need to read the book. You just they cover the whole gamut. It's like,
exactly. Okay. Our good friend Hugh is reading X-Men number 16. I'm also reading that, but that is not my pick this week. Stephanie is reading Dragon Hoops. Hannah is reading Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Kev is reading One Piece Volume 10. He said he's getting back on the train. I'm so excited. I think when Kev gets to chapter 1000, we're gonna have him on the show. We're gonna do a One Piece extravaganza or something.
I thought it was a boat.
All right, listen, Danny, get out of here. And Paul G is reading Ballad for Sophie. For me this week, though, I am reading Sarah Anderson's brand new original graphic novel / strip comic, Cryptid Club. The synopsis of this is: do you hate social gatherings, dodge cameras, enjoy staying up a little bit too late at night? You might have more in common with your local cryptid than you may think. Enter the world of Cryptid Club, a look inside adventures of elusive creatures ranging from Mothman to the Loch Ness Monster. This humorous new series celebrates the unique qualities that make cryptids so desperately sought after by mankind to no avail. After all, it's what makes us different that makes us so beautiful. I mean, it's Sarah Anderson, right? You've seen Sarah's scribbles on the internet. I'm certain of it, whether you are someone who doesn't read comics or does. I know you've seen a Sarah Scribbles comic. That being said, Sarah recently did a book, I think it was last year, a book called Fangs. Probably one of the funniest, self-contained strip comics that I've read in a really long time. I think Nimona is the only other book I can compare it to in terms of telling a narrative story while also just being standalone 1 to 3 page comics. that book ruled. Fangs was like one of the funniest, cutest things I've read in forever. And I think Sarah Anderson knows how to write a damn good comic book. So I'm so excited. This is about cryptids. It's right around the perfect time of the year. Of course, the publishing industry knows who they're catering to. People like me who are dorks and love this kind of stuff. So I'm really excited to see Sarah's take on some of my favorite cryptid monsters. I can't wait to read this. And if you haven't had a chance, go read Fangs. And then I know you're going to love it. Go pick up Cryptid Club because I'm sure you're going to love that as well. And then get all the other stuff that Sarah's done, her collection of Sarah's scribbles and stuff, because those are really fun. But yeah, I'm really excited to read this, and I cannot wait to sit down literally after the show. That's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to sit down and read this. I'm so hyped. So I guess with all of that, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about 3 new number ones that we wanted to recommend to each other. It was a whole thing. Danny came to me with a gun and he said, Mike, we're talking about new number ones. And I said, what? And then that's what we're doing this week. So we'll be back in a second to explain how that all came together. This week on I Read Comic Books, Danny was going to force us to read the Django Legends comic, and instead we decided that we were going to read a different set of number ones, so that we would actually be able to end this show with less of a sour taste in our mouths, I think, because as we were saying in the break, no one cares about Legends anymore. So we're going to talk about some comic books that we all picked. Sorry, Danny, I don't mean to pick on you. I just enjoy having you on the
funny.
show. Okay?
I didn't even bring that up to the conversation. That was Nick, but
I know. Oh, well, you know what?
Nick brought it up. I read it.
Okay,
but yeah.
I see. And I totally forgot that it was even a thing until someone brought it up today. So anyways, we all picked a bunch of number ones for the others to read because, sometimes we just need to say that we're reading something and we need to force it on other people to make sure that we're not going crazy when we think that they're great. So Danny, Nick, and I all picked number ones. We're going to go around the room here really quick, talk about the books that we picked, and then we're going to go around again one more time and talk about those books, like what we thought about them. So I guess starting with you, Nick, what was the book that you picked for us? And I guess briefly, why?
Yeah. So I picked Kaya number 1, or Kaya number 1. I'm not quite sure what is the official pronunciation.
Sure.
I'm sure I'll settle into one or the other unintentionally. This is from Image Comics. The writing and the art are by Wes Craig. The color is by Jason Wardy. The letters by And World Design. And I pretty much knew I was going to be reading this book a long, long time ago, just because I've always been a huge, huge fan of Wes Craig and his storytelling and his artwork. And as I mentioned in the first half, Wes Craig has been somewhat preoccupied for the past 8 years because Rick Remender has had him chained to a desk in his basement, a la Stephen King's Misery, drawing pages of Deadly Class. I mean, I say, I kid, I joke, but if you've read Rick Remender's stuff, there's some pretty dark shit that goes on there. So I'm not totally ruling out that maybe just a few months ago, Wes Craig was finally freed from this prison. Like maybe if I go on CNN and Google it, like it was a big event. I'm not sure. But I've always been a fan of Craig. His artwork is just amazing. And so when I found out that he was finally getting the chance to do his own project with Kaya number 1, I was like immediately getting this book, 100% getting this book. It's just, the artwork is fantastic. You've got this whole sweeping, I don't know if I'd say it's dark fantasy. I'd say it's like slightly post-apocalyptic fantasy. And you've got this young woman named Kaya, and she's protecting her younger brother as they travel across this world. And it's just a big sweeping fantasy, and I enjoyed it a whole lot. I knew I would enjoy the art, but I didn't think I would like the story as much as I did.
Well, I don't know if that's a plus for Wes Craig's writing or not. I mean,
that's fair.
Cool. Well, Danny, what about you? What did you bring to the table today?
So I brought Briar number 1 from Boom Studios. This book was written by Christopher Canwell, illustrations by Herman Garcia, colors by Mateus Lopez, and letters by And World Design. And I read this a couple weeks ago when it was released, but when we were chatting about the show, I realized that you guys hadn't read that. So hopefully, that was a good indicator that maybe this is what I need to pick. And this book, the premise is, what if Sleeping Beauty never got her happily ever after and instead had to save herself? So this turns the fairy tale into more of a dark fantasy. I found that it was a really interesting twist. I'm a big fan of Candwell. Like it was the first time I've been picking up Doctor Doom and Iron Man since he took over both of those books.
Oh yeah.
So and he's a really good writer in my opinion. Or at least he's one of the writers that I'll pick up pretty much any number one they put out, and I've yet to be disappointed. So hopefully you guys felt similar. So we'll talk about that. But Mike, what did you pick?
I decided to dig into the forbidden lands of Dynamite Comics. I know that they're kind of a sketchy publisher, given some of their weird choices that they've made with some Comicsgate folks in terms of just publishing their comics or publishing their covers. But regardless, they still own a property that I do enjoy reading comics of, and that is 007. So I recommended that you guys read 007 #1. This is written by Philip Kennedy Johnson, who's also writing Alien right now, with art by Marco Finnegan, colors by Deborah Kelly, and letters by Jeff Eckleberry. The synopsis for this book is 007 is back in action after a high-stakes rescue mission is mysteriously violently sabotaged. James Bond's future at MI6 hangs in the balance. Classic, right? As he awaits his fate, Bond is urgently contacted by an old flame and mentor, Gwendolyn Gann, formerly Agent 003, who warns Bond of an existential threat to England and the global balance of power. Again, classic Bond. Before they can meet, 003 turns up dead, sending Bond on the most personal mission of his career: find Gwendolyn Gann's killers and expose the shadowy organization only known as Myrmidon. I don't know how to say it.
That's right.
I'm a sucker for 007. I know Nick likes some 007 stories, and I just assumed 2 out of 3 ain't bad. So whether or not, Danny, you liked it, I wanted you guys to read it. I personally really found this book to be super engaging and like touching on all the things that I enjoy the most about like James Bond stories. So figured let's try it out. So I guess getting right into things, starting with Nick's book, Kaya. Nick, you've kind of given your thoughts on it. I guess, Danny, do you want to start with what you thought about Kaya #1?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm glad Nick picked this because it was on my to read pile as well. Like I said, I like reading #1s, especially some of the bigger indie publishers. And I mean, Image is kind of at the top of that list. And yeah, the talent behind it and the cover looked really fun. I didn't really look into the synopsis, but I really enjoyed the book. I will say I think I would rather read this as a collection but I like the pilot enough, I guess, if you will, for me to continue. I like the art and the character designs. I love that the little brother Jin is so annoying, and but he also seems to be the narrator. So there's obviously a lot going on there. And then just the really cool tease of the arm. Like, I want to see an arm, arm wrestling between Kaya and Hellboy. So yeah, really fun book. There's a lot of seeds planted for this, which I think hopefully they'll pay off greatly. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'm glad I read it. But I definitely will wait for the trade on this one. But what about you, Mike?
Yeah, I don't know. I like Wes Craig's art a lot. I think that there are pieces of this story that I really like. I think that I will continue reading it. I might trade weight it. I'm not really sure, but like the story is interesting, right? I like the unknowns of this destroyed kingdom that they talk about. I guess we should probably say little spoilers for all this stuff. We're probably gonna have spoiled the first issue of all this these comics, but Kaya's arm thing, it looks cool. I like the mystery behind it. There's something that's going on there. But yeah, this destroyed kingdom thing and siblings trying to stay together is a fun trope. I like the mystery of it. I like the world that they built out with, like, it's not just humanoid people, it's like lizard people, and there's a little bit of romance there, and there's a little bit of kind of every little thing that, in my opinion, touches on you touch on for a good YA story. Like, this truly feels like a YA book, which is ultimately, in my opinion, its downfall. I like YA books a lot, but I don't like them as serialized comics. I think this should have been a graphic novel. I think that Wes Craig has enough of a selling point that he probably could have published this as a graphic novel, and it probably would have done really well at Image. That being said, I like the first issue. I like the all ages feel that it has. Like, I feel like I could give this to my nephew and he'd probably dig the hell out of it. Like, every single piece, like, the characters are really likable. The designs are really cool. There's some incredible action that happens. But overall, it just kind of feels okay. And maybe that's just because we're only getting the first issue and I'm being super judgmental. Maybe I'm coming off of my frustration of Deadly Class still. But also, I kind of feel like I like Wes Craig's art in Deadly Class. I don't know if I like it so much in this like fantasy world so much. So I don't know. Maybe I'll have to give it another shot. But I felt like just in the middle about this issue. So Nick, your rebuttal.
Yeah. I mean, you make a good point. I think it could be an OGN, but I think it's also too soon to really put that judgment out there until we see how this gets sort of segmented and chopped up.
Yeah.
Because I do think the cliffhangers and whatnot were placed well, but I do really like that the book uses black lettering on speech bubbles that are filled in with different colors, and so you can actually identify who the speaker is. So Kaya always seems to have, and it's color coded, I think, to the colors, to the characters, the colors of their outfit. So Kaya uses red bubbles. Her lizard friend, I think, uses blue, and then her brother uses gold. And of course, I think they refer to him as the golden child.
Yeah, he's a prince or something from their kingdom. Yeah.
And we get the idea that she's supposed to be escorting him somewhere because there's a prophecy that he will save their people once he like and I don't remember if this is like literally on it's like the pitch on the front cover and it doesn't get spoken about much, but that he's supposed to train with this monk. And then once he does, he will become this savior of their people. But I totally get what you're saying, that at least right now, maybe this could have just been an OGN. But absolutely, totally love the artwork. And you're absolutely right. I do think, and who knows if this will continue to be this way, but I think in terms of setting a tone, probably, that it does feel like it is all ages. And I don't think they would flip the script on that later.
And I don't want to say that that's a bad thing. I really genuinely don't. I think like this is the kind of, in my mind, this is the right kind of like serious, but also still not like ultra gory that you want out of a YA book. Because I was just listening to a podcast earlier about someone talking about how so many YA books are like aimed at like really young audiences. They're supposed to be young adult, right? They're supposed to cover things. They're supposed to have violence. They're supposed to have action. They're supposed to have stakes and risk and bad things happen to the characters. Not everything can be hunky-dory, right? And I like that this book doesn't fall into the tropes of like, we need to be over the top with our violence and gore and swearing and all this stuff, but also still feels serious enough that like me as an adult, I feel like all of that being said, it feels like a PG-13 movie and I can still enjoy all of it. You know, I will say, you know, back to the art really quick, I do really like the lizard people in this issue. I'm like skimming through it right now.
They look cool.
I would love to just see Wes Craig do like non-human people for like the whole story. I think that would be so much better than I don't know, his super round weird humanoid people they're kind of like put me off of the art style, but like his lizard people look super cool. So I don't know, maybe it's just me. I might just be particular. I don't know why, but again, the YA thing, I don't think that's bad. I really think that it is pushing the medium in terms of saying like younger readers can take harsher stories. And I think that this has a lot of weight in it that you do see in YA books. I kind of want things to go wrong for these kids in order to like, no, hear me out. Let me finish my sentence.
I get it.
I kind of want things to go wrong for these kids in a way that like, this is a story about overcoming severe adversity, you know? And because I think that's possible. And I think Image has the guts to do it. Boom never will, you know, like, let's be honest about who's making YA books. Right. So, you know, let's see where it goes. I think I'm a trade waiter, but who knows? I'll probably buy number 2 just to see where the cliffhanger picks up.
Yeah, there's some really cool covers for this, so I definitely like if I see a cool variant for this, like I'll definitely pick it up.
We got him, folks.
Not that I don't like Wes Craig's art, but I think the variants, like you said, are aimed at a maybe younger audience. But there's some cool ones that are not that much at a younger audience, different style. So, and I love the sibling relationship, like. The big it gave me almost, I know they're not siblings, but Avatar: The Last Airbender vibes, where like Aang feels you know, he's the spoilers I guess for Avatar, he's the Avatar and he feels a little entitled, but then he meets these people that are trying to help him out, and they're trying to do everything they're trying to do everything to help him, but he still doesn't understand that, and he still feels very entitled. And I think Jin is kind of the same way, where he'll have to learn. He's gonna have to learn all these lessons, tough lessons. He already learned one with the food, right? The guy had the food. He had nothing but his precious things or his sister's things or whatever, and he had to make a tough decision, which I thought he was gonna make the right decision, but I feel like he didn't. But yeah,
here's all of the records of my family's history for thousands of years. Yeah. And then the lizards are like, perfect, we needed more kindling fire, and they throw it in. And I love, and I don't know if you guys caught this, just the lettering on when he's like begging for the piece of meat, and he just says, please. And it's in like 0.2 font, and it's like quivering, and it's so sad. And it's that's good lettering. That's that's perfect execution for that scene.
Yeah, I agree.
So good. And as Danny said, like the one detail I'm looking at that I find really interesting is that you have the story being told after the fact by the younger brother. And I think that's interesting. Almost always when I see something like that, I'm like, oh no, people are going to die. Like, why are you telling the story years later? It's like tragedy will happen. But I think it's just if anything else, just and any opportunity to have more Wes Craig art is just I'll take it.
Yeah, Danny, let's talk about your book. Let's talk about Briar #1. We kind of got your thoughts, I think, a little bit on this, but so Nick, take it away. What did you think of Briar #1?
Well, for me, like I'm always a fan of Christopher Cantwell. Admittedly, his Obi-Wan wasn't quite my thing, and I don't want to get into a massive argument with Danny on that because I know he felt a little differently. But some of Cantwell's other stuff I've really enjoyed. I thought. And we don't want to start this who's on first routine, so we won't. But I really enjoyed, and this is the title of the book, quote, everything, unquote. We are not having the Abbott and Costello, what's everything? Oh, I liked everything routine, because we did that about
no one was going to do I don't think we're going to do that this time.
Well, I just wanted to be careful. Honestly, I love this book's pivot from aesthetically and narratively looking like the narrative of Sleeping Beauty, especially aesthetically, for the first 14 to 15 pages. You also have this, what I also really enjoy is in that opening narrative, they're like, oh yeah, the narrator who normally tells this story is dead, right? And the narrator was captured and boiled in a cauldron for hours, and yet everything looks so bright and smiling and happy on the page. And so you have this just discord, right? You have this disconnect between what you're reading in the prose and what you're seeing in the visuals. And it just reminded me a lot of Cantwell's Everything, where everybody is like smiling and happy all the time. And yet the narrative is like, oh yeah, my family life is fucked up and my wife hates me or whatever. And just sort of this disconnect between the art and the prose. And so seeing Cantwell do that again, I think was sort of interesting to see that kind of trick. But the other thing I thought was really great is there's a page where at the top of the page, it shows the prince, right? The prince who, as Danny mentioned earlier, opts, oh, what if I don't, awaken Sleeping Beauty with a kiss? It shows him like choosing to go to war, right? And it's the page of him going to war, and it transitions through a series of panels showing the kingdom going into decay, basically. And everything falling to, basically to ashes and dust. And what's so cool is panel by panel, the art transitions from this bright, almost pastel color palette to this darker inking in these darker shades and these heavier tones and colors, panel by panel by panel, as the kingdom falls into this, state of discord, if you will. And then in that final panel, it's the tomb, and it's got all these, vines and ivy over it. And it almost looks like you go from like perfect storybook, whatever at the top, to like Mike Mignola Gothic, whatever, by the bottom of the page. And that page for me is just so well done. And I think it's perfect.
Yeah, this is a really interesting story. It feels like, haha, now Cinderella can say the F word. but it also
we're gonna do it.
But also I do enjoy the play on, you know, this classic story. I thought the twist of the prince saying like, why bother even waking the princess up? I could just be king, dude. Like,
Yeah.
what a fucking like perfect like middle finger to all of like these fairy tales. I love that. I thought that was such a fun like not Shrek, but also Shrek kind of way of telling this like fairy tale story. And then, of course, the book becomes super brutal. I really, really, really enjoyed the decayed look of the castle. I mean, that person comes and frees her, wakes her up somehow. We don't know who that is. But I love that sequence of the story. I thought that was really cool. For me, though, the story kind of took like a bit of an extreme turn. All of a sudden, she's fighting this rat monster. She knows how to use a sword, and it's kind of brutal. Like, I'm not going to argue about like what is the learning curve for using a longsword or anything like that, but it did seem like kind of a lot to move the story along. Again, this is me nitpicking, but I did find it like kind of interesting. Like it feels like a D&D story, like a true fantasy story. Like this strange woman comes out of the forest to this place where these people try to immediately turn her into a slave. Someone says no, they get captured regardless. It becomes like a whole thing. I like the where this issue went. I like the cliffhanger. There's this weird thing that happens in her sleep because she's scared of sleeping. Like, we've already got like a lot of trauma and a lot of other things that build up a character who is flawed to tell an interesting story as she needs to overcome these series of adverse things. So I liked it, though I don't know if I would pick this up month to month. I think that's kind of like my final thought. I think that this would work great as like a Hoopla borrow, or it would work as like a trade that I would grab in a sale or something. But I don't know if this would be, I would gravitate toward this immediately. There is enough in this issue, though, that kind of sparks a lot of curiosity, and I do want some of these questions answered, right? Like, why was the person that they found in this hut in the middle of the desert, why did he cut his own throat? It seemed like he was going to be violent towards these two people that got captured, but instead he kills himself because he's so scared of what's going to happen, you know? All of that kind of stuff, really interesting, makes for a really interesting number one. I think in a worse written book, this would have felt like too much story. But Christopher Cantwell clearly knows how to tell a story with a lot of words without it feeling overbearing. I guess like the final thing I'll say, like I kind of already talked about the art, but I do appreciate the really bold color choices and minimal line work that's done. There's a lot of shading, but not a lot of line work in this. And I think the book benefits from that. It has a very distinct feel and look for it that you don't, I think, see in a lot of other fantasy books, because they usually try to like hype it up. Like I'm thinking of a Barbaric, right? Barbaric is extremely detailed, beautiful book, but it's a different type of fantasy story. And again, that's a book that's like, let's take the gore and amp it up to 11. This book feels violent, but it doesn't feel overly violent. Again, not like Kaya. This is a little bit more of a rated R movie than a PG-13 movie. But I did like it. I will say that. I would probably continue reading this. I just don't know if I'd read it month to month.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, so I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. Sleeping Beauty I haven't seen it in a long time, and I'm sure there's stuff that didn't age well, but I love that stuff with the dragon when Maleficent turns into the dragon, and like that imagery, and the way this book took a turn, it kind of led into that, right? Just through a different path, through going through all these years of the kingdom and decay, like Nick was mentioning earlier. So I really like that. I like that, like Michael, you said, like the line work is minimal, but like where the inks need to be heavy, they are, and I really appreciate that. Like it definitely gave me a lot of like Gothic Mignola vibes. I'm like, oh, I need to find more of Herman Garcia's work, like just to see what other things. So I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. I think I'll also trade weight it just because I like the story enough, but like some of these other books we've been talking about, it's not episodic, and I mean that's a whole other thing that we could talk about, how these serialized comics really should just be they're really just working for the trade. But yeah, I mean I'm on board enough that Boom's been putting out some really interesting stuff as of late. This was another one of those books. So
yeah, definitely. Well, let's talk about the last book. I picked 007 number 1, or as we were joking in the pre-show, not 7 or 007 or 007.
What do you do if you're like Agent 10? Do you be like, I'm Agent 010?
I'm Agent 010.
010.
I don't know. 010. But let's talk about this. I kind of gave my thoughts about this. I love Bond stories, it seems. But I guess, Danny, what were your thoughts on this book?
So I'm not very familiar with James Bond. I've only seen the Daniel Craig stuff. But I know enough
Okay.
about the character just from that to know what a James Bond book should feel like. I read, I think, one volume of Greg Pak's 007, which
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed enough. This one was a little bit different though. The one thing I'll start, I guess, with the negative. The art sometimes felt a little flat to me, and I don't mean flat as in not very vibrant. I just mean flat as in like the characters kind of look like they were actually compressed, like flat. There was not a lot of detail sometimes. Sometimes
Sure.
the faces threw me off a little bit, like you're supposed to be this handsome dude, but it's just like a little line for your mouth. Like, and I'm sure all that stuff, maybe it's just a design choice by the artist. It just didn't fully vibe with me, but I like the writing. I like there's some humor there when he throws a plushie to distract the assailant, and like all that James Bond stuff that I like. It definitely came through in the story. I appreciate the change in coloring for the flashbacks because that's how you like all those little details, like, you know, using the lettering correctly or using the narration to tell me something different from what's happening on the page. Like all those little details I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate. So whenever the coloring changes for a purpose, like it did on both Briar and on this book, for the
Mm-hmm.
flashbacks, I really appreciate that. So I enjoyed this enough. Where I don't know that I'll keep reading just because 007 is not my. I haven't even seen the last movie, so
Sure.
maybe I should watch that first and then read this. I don't know.
I mean, these comics are totally
Yeah,
independent of the movies,
yeah,
which is something that I've always appreciated. Like, I think when Warren Ellis was doing it, Greg Pak, Andy Diggle, like a bunch of people have written 007 recently for under different names, James Bond 007, James Bond, Bond, you know,
yeah,
whatever. And I love that they're taking these tropes that make a Bond story good and then like applying them in a way that only comics can kind of do, right? Like the benefit of comics is that you don't need to have a big, huge budget to do
yeah.
huge explosions and stuff. You just need an artist that's willing to draw that for you,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
But yeah, I'm glad that, I mean, you at least enjoyed
yeah.
this
And
issue.
then
So
the last thing, I mean, like you mentioned, this is a Dynamite book. I don't really buy Dynamite books, although I just
yeah,
read a Red Sonja book last week because of the creator behind it. So yeah, maybe I'll
sure,
check this out once it's on Hoopla collected together. But
yeah,
Nick, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, Mike's right. I do occasionally read books of this series. I do think some of them are interesting. And I think it's a tough road to tread as a writer because, like, so many of these so many of these books all have to hit the reset button on what the last writer or team has done. Like,
yeah,
you just don't assume that there's any carryover. And so whatever writer is dragged into this, it's like, okay, hit the reset button, and now you need to like set up this complicated geopolitical problem for the world and do all of this. And a lot of times you see the first issue just get plastered with prose as they're like, let me prove to you that I have a good handle on modern events and I am a very good writer and I will set up this very intricate plot for you. And it's
yeah,
like you're just like reading a fucking dictionary, and it's like, oh, I can't do this. Like, because ultimately, like, Bond is not about gadgets or guns or villains endangering the value of the human dollar. We can do that quite well on our own, thank you. It's about a sad man it's about a sad man in a suit staring off into the sunset from a bridge, just and looking depressed. And as
hmm
long as you give me that, like, we're good. And this book does it multiple times. There are multiple sad bridge shots, which is what I need to have a good Bond book. And Danny's right. There is some weird derp face here from time to time,
sure,
but I don't mind the fact that it's a little bit of a different aesthetic. It does feel like a lot of the Bond books sort of have this house style about,
hmm
well, the pencils should kind of look like this. And Bond, even though we're not following like a movie likeness, we sort of have a weird house style of how Bond should look. And
hmm
so it doesn't look like, for example, Mark Laming's Bond, which was he was the artist with Craig Pak's run. But I think there are some creative choices here. I like that it hits the ground running. Philip Kennedy Johnson doesn't feel too obsessed with having like an intricate geopolitical scenario. He's like, uh-oh, Bond got in trouble again. Let's cut to the meeting where his boss tells him off and says, you're a loose cannon, Bond, and you need to go. We're going to give you 2 weeks off to get your shit together.
Turn in
huge
your
scenes
badge.
turn in your badge and your gun.
Come on, it's so good.
No, but I'm saying like that's what you want, because like it hits the ground running, and I think the flashbacks are really well done. I think, I don't know who on the team decided to use Ben-Day dots. Those are the, you see those in older comics, that sort of dot arrangement. I think you even see it in like Bazooka Joe Bubblegum uses Ben-Day dots for their comic strips, but using Ben-Day dots for the flashbacks was such a clever choice. It's nuanced, and I had to like do a double take and be like, am I seeing that? But yeah, Ben-Day dots for the flashbacks is cool. Like I said, it's just a streamlined, taut thriller. I finished issue 1. I immediately started issue 2. Like, that's like the bare minimum for me. If you can make me do that, we're in a good place. If I'm like, all right, well, I better go pick up something else, that's sort of the clue that maybe things aren't going as well. But I've enjoyed it so far.
I felt like I knew it wasn't going to be a hard sell for you, Nick. I mean,
I knew you were a fucking pushover. I'm not that concerned about you. Let's cut back to Danny. We knew you were a lock. Yeah.
I think Nick and I, you and I have similar tastes sometimes. Yeah. And like the Venn diagram it's a pretty small sliver sometimes of things that we absolutely like guaranteed are going to like, right? Like an Ed Brubaker book's going to fit right in there.
Yep. James
James Bond, I think, is going to always fit in there. There's something about, I think, white men as they get older, they just like spy thrillers. I don't understand what it is, but I bet you $5 we could put Paul on this episode and he could also love this 007 issue. But anyways, no, I'm glad to hear that. I mean, Danny, I think I'd be interested to hear your thoughts after this arc is done, because I feel like the James Bond comics always are written in arcs that feel like movies. Again, like, it's clear, like Ian Fleming was, when the movies were adapted way back in the day, like, they had a specific feel. And I think these comics try to carry forward that feel with a modern take. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts if you could read the whole arc.
That's the follow-up show. We read volume 1 of all these 3 first issues. And then we come back to see like a post-mortem, like what happened.
That's what I'm putting it on the calendar. That's going to happen. That's happening later, probably early next year.
Check back in like 6 to 8 months, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I guess to wrap things up for today's episode, I guess, did you guys have any last thoughts about things? Was this a fun experiment? Would you want to do it again? I mean, Danny, it sounds like you're up for this volume 1 thing, but like, I think we've got a verdict on each of these books, but any last thoughts? I guess we'll start with you.
Yeah, this was fun. Originally, we were joking about like, maybe we'll do like a dunk contest where we all bring a number 1 and we'll just try to dunk on it against each other. But I'm glad it didn't turn out that way, because I rather read comics that I enjoy. And even if they all didn't hit all the way, I think this was a fun discussion. So yeah, I would definitely love to revisit these in the future.
Yeah. I mean, when we do the eventual I Hate Comic Books podcast series on Patreon, once we hit that goal, that's what we'll do. It'll be a dunk contest. Will definitely be one of the topics. Nick, what about you? What were your last thoughts?
Yeah, I think Danny hit the nail on the head, which was that, I think for a while there it was like, we'll all come into this, it'll be a dunk contest, and I'm just laughing like, haha, we won't do that, and I'm just secretly writing my notes. I was like, if this turns into a fucking dunk contest, I'm going to be goddamn prepared. Here's my shit list on these other 2 books. This is my nuclear option, although these days we probably shouldn't be throwing that phrase around. But no, I really enjoyed the books. I think this was a good idea. I think it also helps people out there who are wondering, what are some new, interesting books that are out there? What's the take? Mm-hmm. Help me, save some cash and figure out what's worthwhile. And so I think we're doing a valued public service here, and we should all pat ourselves on the back.
Yeah, we probably saved someone $3 to $8 if they didn't like the other 2. So
exactly. Cool. Well, yeah, this to me is always fun. I mean, I wasn't gonna read Briar number 1. Kaya was on my list, but clearly I wasn't putting it forward. I'm so hesitant on Wes Craig. I don't understand it. It's the deadly class effect. That's what I'm gonna call it. But this is all really good stuff. Again, I'm probably gonna trade weight a little bit on these, but we'll see. I'll probably end up picking up number 2. This is what always happens. Whenever people get passionate about a book, I'm just like, I'm gonna read that forever, even though I may not even like it. So that's both of your faults that I'm getting poorer. So to wrap things up, I guess I want to thank you both for being on the episode today. Next week it's gonna be me, Brian, and Renee. We're gonna be talking with some folks from Dismay Comics. They have a Kickstarter that's coming up. It's gonna be a horror anthology. It looks really, really cool from the preview that I've seen. So look forward to that. Check us out on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Discord, Goodreads, wherever you can find us on the internet. All the links are in our show notes, so go check that out. You can support us on Patreon to get access to a better Batmobile that Danny was talking about, Saga of Saga. We're recording that very soon, so if you're into Saga and you want to hear what we thought about Volume 10, make sure you subscribe to check that out. I want to say thank you to Infinity Shred, who are the best band in the universe. They do all of our music. Zander is a pixie floating in the cool breeze of autumn winds. I want to say thank you to Danny and Nick and Kate for proof listening today. And until next time, I guess thank you to all the people on Discord. You're wonderful. You're making fun of me the entire time, even though it was just my birthday, but I guess I'll allow it. Thank you to everyone who continued to listen to the end of the credits. You are the best listeners in the world. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.